Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, A Day in the Life of an Engineer, Data Management with SOLIDWORKS PDM. My name is Jake Davis. I'm a data management specialist with GoEngineer. A little bit about me. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. Prior to coming to GoEngineer, I spent 20 years in the industry as a mechanical engineer, reliability engineer, engineering manager, and director of operations across a lot of different disciplines for aerospace, medical device, factory automation, industrial vehicle design, consulting, and with that I did lean engineering and then SOLIDWORKS PDM and document control implementations. I've been a SOLIDWORKS user for about 20 years, and I am a certified SOLIDWORKS expert and a certified SOLIDWORKS PDM professional administrator. So again, we're going to talk about data management, and really, the question for this is how does data management impact an engineer's everyday life? I'm going to start it out a little bit, kind of a little story for me and how it kind of got going for me. So how it started early in my career, I was an excited young engineer. I worked for an aerospace company, and I was really fortunate to be able to have the opportunity to kind of just do what I wanted in a way. I was in a testing group, and our job was to come up with test fixtures and things to test the equipment that the other engineers were designing, and I really had a free reign. I could design things, and then I was making them myself, and nobody was really checking my drawings or anything like that. If I messed up, I was the one who had to sort of pay for that mistake. So it was a ton of fun. I was learning 3D CAD and just really anything I had in my brain, I could really make and put on that CAD program, and then ultimately I could get it fabricated and we would use it, and that was really neat. After a few years, my family decided to move to a new city, and I took a job as an engineer with a company that was a factory automation company that made machines for the medical device industry. And so I was off to an entirely new industry and everything else. I had a lot of mentors in my career that showed me different things for designing and how to make pieces go together, and science and theory and all of those things were part of the engineering career. But this place really had one that stood out, and I didn't realize it for a long time, but as I dove more into data management, I realized the impact that this person had on me. When I started with this company, they said, hey, you're not going to design right away. We're going to put you with this gentleman. His name was Paul, and Paul's going to show you the ropes. And Paul was really smart. He was an expert in the thermal processing of this specific metal alloy that we were working with. And by the time I got there, he had already designed this machine, and we were getting ready to go ahead and present this to some customers that were coming in a few days. And we were trying to get this thing put together, and things weren't fitting, and we were making adjustments on the fly and in the machine shop and running back and forth and jotting stuff down on a piece of paper and handing it to a machinist, and we were just scrambling kind of all over the place. Well, the customers came 2 days later. It was a successful test. The customer was happy, and ultimately we got the project done. So once that project was complete, kind of got off the high of a successful project and a happy customer and all those things. And when things kind of quieted down, I asked Paul, I said, what if they order another one? and Paul couldn't answer me. He just kind of got this surprised look on his face. And this was a really smart guy. He'd been in the engineering field for a long time, and I don't know why the question came to me that way, maybe because of the aerospace experience I had before, but it really hit me that he couldn't answer that question. And this was a light bulb moment for me in my career. And I really realized there's a whole lot more going on here than just the fun of designing products and bringing the ideas to life. So that's the big question. What if they order another one? It's really stuck with me. That question to me is on an equal level, and it's a partnership with the creation of the design itself. It's fun to get in there and do all the crazy things with SolidWorks and CAD and have parts machined and all of that, but if we don't manage the things that we create along with and after that process, then we really run a lot of risks of higher cost and rework and a lot of things down the road. So that's why we're going to talk a lot about data management today, and hopefully it's something that everybody can keep fresh in their mind when they're designing and not an afterthought. So there's a few aspects to data management. There's quite a few, but some of the heavy hitters is what we'll really talk about today. It's not always obvious, but every day we create data, we release that data, and we change that data. And this is in the life of an engineer. And if this looks like a process to you, it's because it is. And every company has their way of doing these things, and there's some common threads across all of them. Some throw little different things in here and there, but really what we're talking about is a workflow. And when we're focusing today, we're talking about SOLIDWORKS PDM. It really gives us that ability to create those workflows and customize how we want to manage our files in the system. So if we talk about creating it, releasing it, and changing it, SOLIDWORKS PDM makes this really simple for us. The picture you see here is actually from PDM. It's a customizable way to move the files through, and so we're going to kind of follow this through today and go through creating, releasing, and changing data and how we do that on an everyday basis. So creating data. When we create data, it's like we're making the SOLIDWORKS parts, we're doing these things, and it's fun, right? We're in the 3D world. We can really jump in and zoom in on our parts and drawings, and we can really, get detailed, and we can see this thing that's in our head, and we can see every little single detail of this, and we say, okay, we've created this amazing thing. Well, what happens when we hit this save button? Now what are we going to do with this? And this is really a decision point. It might seem like super simple, but where are we going to save this? What about the files that go with it? And so we've got the file itself. What information needs to go with that file? Do we ever need to access it later? These are all questions we need to be able to answer. So thinking in terms of, how are we going to manage this information itself is, well, what information is necessary? If we look at a file in PDM, we're able to create some placeholders for that information to be able to track it and be able to look it up later and search it and relate it to other things. And in addition to that, we also have the ability to see that, where these files are used, what assemblies they're used in, and also see, if it's an upper level assembly, we can look at, what's contained in those files. Probably notice as I'm navigating here, there's some structure going on here as well. So this is an example of the contains. We can see all those references, and we can control what we're doing with those things. If we're talking about how are we going to manage that, there's a strategy for that too. How are we going to organize our data? When I open a folder, what am I going to see? Am I just going to have, one folder with all my parts in it? Well, if you're a company that's been around for 20 years, you've got a lot of parts, and that's going to make things pretty tough. So thinking about the strategy of how we manage the data in our projects, like in this example, we've split it up by project and then all the different components that go into that project. At the same time, you have to also think about how carried away you want to get. If you have 17 layers of folders to get to your files, that's kind of cumbersome as well. So these are all just things that are kind of food for thought as you're going through that process of generating data and thinking about where you're going to store it. PDM gives us some tools for that. We looked at the data that goes into it and how we can view and then also be able to enter that information. And then in addition to that, if we look at our projects themselves, we can actually build things like templates into PDMs and say we want to create a new project. If I wanted to create a new project for ASU, super simple. I can just punch that in there and it creates that entire folder structure for me. So a lot of companies have really locked down folder structures. some, as you guys go out in the world, you may find that they don't, and it could be completely one pile like we just talked about. Having a tool like PDM on site or implemented in that organization gives you a lot of control that doesn't exist like in a Windows folder structure and things like that, because we can actually control who can access these folders. So you can do that in Windows. It gets a lot more complicated, and your IT group's probably not going to be too happy with you every time you create a new project and want to do different things with them. So PDM is really handy in that once you lock down a structure, it's really simple. It's not cumbersome for engineers. If everyone knows the structure, it's really intuitive where to find your files. And then that big question that comes up when you're saving your files, you don't really have to guess and come up with new ideas. It's already in there, it's locked in. So after we create data, one of the next things we have to do is we have to be able to release it. And there's a lot that goes under the umbrella of saying release it. Releasing data can be as simple as, hey, take a look at this drawing, machinist, I want to make this prototype, and go ahead and get that out the door. It could be more complex. It could be, hey, we want to make this, and we're going to actually invest dollars into this, and customers want to buy this from us. So we need to make sure before we go down a major production path that we get another set of eyes on it, and we review it. And then lastly, we need to be able to track it. So we've put this file out there. We've produced it. We've done it. Well, what version did we make? What's out there? Was it a prototype version? Was it something that's been through that approval process? If we refer back to PDM and we look at the workflow that we saw earlier, it's a really intuitive and simple thing for us to do. Those workflows, each spot you saw in that path is really a stopping point through the engineer. So if we look at here, we're creating it, and then this is part of our releasing it process. We got to have somebody take a look at it, and then after they're done, they can go ahead and release it. So when we look in PDM, we can see a lot of that information here. We can tell whether a file is in design or whether it's been released or what's going on with it. So we've got a couple that we're working on here. We can see that these are local. There's never been anything done to them. So if I jump back over to these in PDM, I can do that, or I'm sorry, in SOLIDWORKS, I can do that right from here. If I go to check this in and add it to my vault, I can see right away where it wants to go, all the information about it. And this is a good example here of those references we talked about earlier. When we go to add something into the PDM vault, it's going to ask us, hey, these files are related to each other. Do you want them all to go? If you say no, you run the risk of maybe trying to open a drawing that can't find a part later or something like that. And as you notice by that window that came up, we also get the ability to add some information here, like something about a revision change. What did we do to this? And we can see that in the file history. So once we check a file in, we can see that that's in design, and if we follow what we were looking at earlier, we could say, hey, we want to release this. So let's follow that process. We've got to be able to submit it for approval, and our engineers can do that right from here. So they can submit that for approval. Our windows are all over. And again, it's keeping track of those references for us so we don't have to remember every single associated file. And then we can also go and send that to somebody else, maybe a quality group, maybe a management group or something like that. They have the ability to review these files, maybe open them in SOLIDWORKS, open them in a preview window. And you can also have multiple groups do it. It doesn't just have to be one person. So you'll find that a lot in the organizations that you go to. Sometimes there's multiple tiers of approvals to make sure that the cost is good, or maybe manufacturing to make sure, hey, we can actually make this part. And then we can go ahead and release it. And once it's released, we can see that workflow state in here, and if we look in back in our browser, we can also see that those files are all released as well. So PDM gives us a lot of visual cues that don't exist if we have some other tool like a Windows file structure or something like that. It's hard to tell without actually opening something up, which if you have large assemblies and things like that, that can be incredibly difficult. So by having those processes in place and locked into PDM, our data management side becomes pretty simple. It really uncomplicates things, and it really makes it so that as engineers, we can just send things down the chain or through the process as we need to as we complete projects. The other thing that it does for us, when we talk about tracking it, is we get revisions. So when we release something, we can track that, and we can look at the entire history of that file in PDM and get down to it here. Just with a couple simple clicks, we can see everything that this has ever gone through. So we can see all the steps that it's moved through. We can see its initial revision, all of those things. You have no way of doing that if you keep overwriting the same file over and over in Windows. And if you keep making a new version every time in Windows, you're going to add a lot of data to your systems really quick. And again, you're not going to have a very happy IT group. So if the organization has PDM, you're going to be able to step right in and learn this really quickly. If it doesn't, maybe something you want to talk to some people about other alternatives that might be there for managing that data a little better. So nothing ever stays the same. You know, if we make designs, it's almost guaranteed that some portion of a design that we make is going to have to be modified or changed through its history. When we work in Windows, it's difficult to track those changes. Like we talked about, you save it, it kind of just overwrites everything. And you can put some notes in your revision block up here and have it that way, but you really don't have a way of pulling that model back up or checking that fitment or whatever it might have been prior to that. That history that we looked at in PDM, you can pull all of that directly from there. And then this also lets you control those revisions in PDM itself. By having something released, we typically would lock that down to make sure that nobody has the ability to, or the permissions to be able to change those files because we're actively making them and shipping them to our customers. But if something comes up where maybe it doesn't fit quite right in the field, or maybe a new idea, hey, we can enhance this and make it a better product for our customers, you need to be able to change that. And so following that workflow that we looked at earlier, and following that process, if we're here, we need to be able to cycle back through that process and go ahead and make changes to those files. So in PDM, it's super simple. It can be a right click, and there's another icon here. We can just say, hey, let's make changes to this file. And again, it tries to grab those references, so we don't have to think about that. If I've got a drawing with an assembly and 5 components to it, I don't have to remember the file names of each and every one of those. It grabs all of that for me and says, hey, if you're going to make a change to this, well, then you're probably going to make a change to the part that this is made from. Go ahead and say OK. And now if we look, we're back in that design stage, and typically we would give our engineers permission to make some changes to those. So if we did something like, we want to make this a little lighter, so we'll pop a little hole into it. Slowly. We can quickly make those changes, update our drawings as we need to. Like, okay, well, we didn't have anything before over here, so maybe we need to add a quick view. And then we can go ahead and dimension that view, or dimension those changes as we need to. So if we made some changes, we might want to add that information here. We can add a revision, or we can Click our little button there to add it. Flag that revision down. And then notate what that is. So once I've got all that done, I can save it. Well, why is it asking me that? So this is one of the neat things about PDM, is that it gives you the ability to check files in and out. When they're checked in, they're visible to everyone. Everybody can see them if they have those permissions, and you can prevent somebody from accidentally overwriting something. So in this case, by not checking it out, we've got a read-only document that we want to make changes to, but it's being protected. So we still have the ability to go ahead and check that file out, and we want to take ownership of that. And again, it's going to ask us, do we want to make changes to both of these? Well, yeah. If we didn't check this out, we'd lose that hole we just put in there. So now I can see who owns that. And this is really neat for doing things like collaborating on other designs. So if you're working on changes maybe to a top-level assembly, then you can check out different pieces, and other coworkers can grab other pieces at the same time and work on them collaboratively. So if we've got our changes all done, we can go ahead and check our files back in. Add our notes as we need to, speaking and typing at the same time. And then we can go ahead and submit those for approval. So we have the ability to see all of that information that we saw in Explorer right here also. And if we needed to make changes to this, like we could maybe change this to pedestal, bearing, new lighter version, or some other name, we have the ability to edit that data right here. And whoever's reviewing it can also see any of that information and then go ahead and release it for us. By doing this process in PDM, our revisions are actually controlled by PDM itself rather than us just typing a note in a drawing. All too often I've seen drawings that have been released to a floor that maybe say Rev C on them. And if you ever run into any old machinists, if they'll let you look in their drawers, there's always a drawer that has some old drawings in it. And you can find that same Rev C drawing, but with different features on it. In the industry, it's really fast paced and things are moving and changing very quickly, and it's easy to make a change and then try to get it to the floor and be able to get something made quickly and things like that. But if we do that and we're in a hurry and the process isn't controlled, we end up with some things that say like the same revision or something like that, and it ends up being confusing and creating rework for us. And that's something we really want to avoid because rework is very, very expensive. So PDM is a great tool to help us control that a little bit. So last part I talked about was changing data. We need to be able to unrelease it. We need to be able to take it out of that release stage. We need to be able to make edits and changes and things like that to it. And then we also need to be able to re-release it. So we've got to take the changes that we made and we've got to be able to get them back out there. So being able to manage it, not just once it's been released or not just when you're creating it, but throughout the whole process is really important. Just because we make parts, maybe we don't see them again for a while, doesn't mean they're forgotten. We're probably going to have to make some changes to it, and we need to be able to control how we make those changes and what that looks like in the process. So again, just to kind of cycle back and review, 3 major points of managing data itself. We need to be able to create it, and it's not just the files, but it is creating the files and the information that goes with them. For CAD and things like that, it's the references. It's what is the supporting documentation. It doesn't necessarily have to be a CAD file. It could be a build sheet. It could be a specification sheet. It could be a photo that you want to go with it. So managing all of those references and keeping that project data and that information intact. And then folders, like where are we going to keep this? these are things to think about when you're creating that data. What does it look like in the future? How do I find this later? And then releasing that data. How do we get it reviewed? How do we send it to somebody? Do we print it out and then run it over to somebody's desk? Can we electronically just push it on through like we looked at with PDM? And then that ability to approve it. Do we do that right there? Do we have to, put red lines all over it and walk it back to the person? PDM lets us just handle that, right click and say, yep, I like it, let's get it on. And then tracking it. Having PDM control those revisions and keep track of that for us. If we look at our files that we were working with and look at that history, we can see all of that is tracked for us. Where our notes that we added in here, when it went from a revision, not only just revisions, but every time that file has been checked out, changed, and checked back in, a version of that is kept. So being able to track that is really important. And then lastly, we talked about being able to change that data. How do we bring it back from in production or being released or being on the floor? How do we pull it back from that to where we're allowed to make changes to it through permissions, or make sure that maybe manufacturing people can't see it because it's being changed and we don't want them to make it anymore. And then being able to alter that, checking those files out, making changes to them, or maybe collaborating and having other people check files out and make changes to them, and then getting them checked back in so that other people can see it, and then we can review it and move it through the process. And then re-releasing it, so back to that, approving it and reviewing it and having it push through, and then back to tracking it to where we're adding that new revision, and it's really clear what's out there. And what's a good drawing or part or assembly or whatever that may be, and what's a bad one, making it really is easy to differentiate from that. So how it's going. I still ask myself this question every single day. What if they order another one? Every time I design something, I try to keep this really prevalent in my mind. What if they order another one? And they may not be ordering something, maybe it's not a customer ordering something, but the question still relates. How do you make sure that even when you're making something that it's not just let go and then you have to keep touching it every single time? If you keep having to go out to the manufacturing floor every time they build something and show someone in assembly or something like that how to put something together, or where to find parts, or what size a hole should be, that takes away from being able to do new designs or innovate or stay on track managing other projects. Every time you have to break away, it doesn't seem like much, but it adds up. And the further you get in your career, the more projects you'll tend to take on and don't really have a lot of room for that engineering rework. That's a real thing too. Remaking parts, people can really tack costs onto, and it's easy to say, hey, we got this part wrong. But there's a big cost to being interrupted and having to redo things and talk to people instead of sitting there and innovating and designing like you should be. Looks like we had one question come up. Does anybody else have any questions that they wanted to throw up there? If you do, there's a Q&A session. Looks like the question is, how difficult would it be for someone else to revert to the initial design before the lightning hole? That's a great question. So I think the question is, how easy would it be for somebody else to go back and accidentally, or maybe even intentionally, go to the one before this and do something? So PDM really tightly controls those permissions. So if I look in the history of this part, I can see that, that was that Rev B one that we made a little bit ago. And if I have the permission, I can roll it back. I can actually get that file too. Now, these are two very different things. The rollback is really like an administrative type thing. So if you roll something back, you lose everything above it. But I can get it, so I can look at it, and I can see what happened before then. But I can't make changes to that file, so because that would cause a leapfrog from here over the top of its most current revision. So PDM gives you the ability to get and look at those files, but you can't overwrite an older version unless you're given very explicit permission to be able to do so.
This concludes our webinar on a day in the life of an engineer with SOLIDWORKS PDM. Thank you everyone for attending.